Okay, we're going to go on with lesson 95 on the Reformation, which has to do with this guy named Martin Luther. Well, Martin Luther was born in 1483 in Germany. His parents, they wanted him to be a lawyer. Well, he grew up with a passion to serve God, but he didn't really know how at that time, and he wasn't really wanting to go into law. But one day he made his decision because he was caught in this great big thunderstorm, a very, very violent thunderstorm. It was thundering and lightning, and he was looking up to God, and he realized that he was this sinner. And so he was begging, he was calling out to God and begging God to save him. And he said, God, if you save me in this storm, I will dedicate my life to you. I'll become a monk. Don't we do that sometimes when we're in the midst of stormy nights? So he was making, but he was true to God. He thought, I will be a monk. I will be a monk, and I will be a good monk. In fact, I will work night and day to make God happy in any way that I could. But he thought that God was a very harsh God, and that God was out there to punish him and everything, and all of his sins had to be worked out in this earth. He didn't really understand the grace of God at all. He visited Rome then, and he thought, I need to go to Rome. I need to go on a pilgrimage because, you know what? I have a lot of sins, and I need to get rid of some of these sins. So he pilgrimaged to Rome, and he went to some of the relics, and where they had pieces maybe of John the Baptist's coat, or all these things. I'm not sure that was it, but he would see these different relics, and he would crawl on his feet, or I should on his knees, on his hands and knees, and give money and penance and say these prayers over and over and over. That's what they did back then. And he looked at these indulgences, and he looked at paying these money, and he did pay some of the money for his relatives to get to heaven and for himself. And this was the year 1510, and things were pretty crazy there in Rome. But Martin really wanted to find peace with God. He walked around with terror and agony in his heart. It says constantly searching and wanting to do more for God and for God to wipe out his sins. So he thought, well, how good do I need to be? What else do I need to do, God? And this was definitely a wrestling with God, kind of like Habakkuk had, huh? And so then as he went further into the priesthood, he had an opportunity to teach theology at the University of Wittenberg in Germany. And then that's when he decided to read the Bible for himself. It was pretty unusual at the time for even priests to read the Bible, which seems kind of crazy, but people didn't read the Bible. So he started to read, and he read up into the book of Romans, where Paul said, the just shall live by faith. Maybe even he went back to the book of Habakkuk, where Paul quoted those words. And it went around in his head over and over, the just shall live by faith. Faith? Grace? Not working our way? Not earning our way to heaven? He never heard of this before. The worst error would be to sell, buying your way to heaven. He thought, I've been trying to buy my way to heaven. And he thought, man, God loves me. And that I have the power through him to live. He loves me. He'll give me the power by the faith and trusting to live for him, and I can love him. And my banner now shall be, the just shall live by faith. So, Martin Luther, he studied the scriptures, and he found other points. In fact, he found 95 points about church doctrine that seemed to be absolutely wrong to him. He wrote those things down. He was a brave man. He was a man that he was going to tell it like it was. Although others had heard about the just living by faith. But this was new to him. But as he started teaching in Wittenberg, so many people saw his vibrance, that he had been born again, really. He had been changed. And on October 31st, 1517, you may say it's Halloween, but it was a special Halloween for sure for him, because it was the day that he went to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg and posted his 95 thoughts against the Roman Catholic Church at that time. And as he posted it, that's what they did in those times. Many people came and read it, and they're like, wow, yeah, I see that. Oh, yeah. And so as it was there, you could imagine what the people of the church, some of the priests got word of that and said, oh, we better go tell the Pope what's going on here. We got this guy out here, and he is basically preaching things against the church. But he was trying to reform the church. He wasn't trying to say things against the church, but he was praying that the church would change in some of these things. He posted his thoughts and all of his criticisms so people would know. And of course, people reacted strongly. And later he even published these small tracts. He published more. But Martin Luther had been born again. He had no fear anymore. He had entered a paradise, and that God had opened his doors, and that God had truly, truly forgiven him. And so he had excitement about as a new Christian. Well, the Pope declared that Martin Luther declared him a heretic in 1520. And Luther showed his rejection of the Pope excommunicating him. He burned his excommunication papers and said, whoopee-ding! I don't know if those are his exact words, but about. And the next year, the Diet, which was the parliament there of the city of Worms, made a government decision by condemning Luther as a heretic and banishing him from the Holy Roman Empire. There was a noble man who was a close friend of his, and he believed in what happened to Luther, and so he took Martin Luther in custody and kept him at the Wartburg Castle for a whole year, actually saving his life, because Martin would have been put to death. Martin Luther, he did not intend to create another church. He only wanted to reform the church he had ever known, the Roman Catholic Church. He wanted to encourage its leaders to turn back to the teachings of the Bible. The Catholic Church responded by excommunicating him, and afterwards Luther had to become a separatist from the church, or he'd be put to death. Since Luther was protesting these Catholic practices, they called them Protestants, protesters. The movement was called the Protestant Reformation. We'll tell you more in just a bit.